night stories, where nightmares become to life and shadows appear in the corners.
Elias gripped the steering wheel tighter as the truck rattled over cracked asphalt. The highway stretched ahead like a scar through the overgrown fields, weeds pushing up through the pavement in defiant clusters. He hadn't seen another vehicle in weeks, not since leaving the remnants of the coastal towns behind. The engine's low hum was the only sound breaking the silence, a silence that had settled over the world like a shroud after the outbreak started 2 years ago. No radio static, no distant horns, just the wind whispering through the open window, carrying the faint rot of decay. Beside him, Mara shifted in the passenger seat, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She was younger, mid-30s maybe, with calloused hands that spoke of harder days before all this. Elias had found her scavenging in a derelict warehouse 3 months back, her knife drawn against shadows that weren't there. She didn't talk much about her past, but the way she flinched at sudden movements hinted at losses deeper than supplies. "You think we'll make it to the valley by nightfall?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with something unspoken. "Should," Elias replied, glancing at the fuel gauge. Half a tank left. He'd siphoned it from an abandoned semi 2 days ago, the hose still tasting of diesel on his lips. The valley was a rumor they'd picked up from a dying traveler, isolated, defensible, with clean water from mountain streams. But rumors were all they had now, fragile threads in an unraveling world. In the back seat, Theo dozed fitfully, his small frame curled under a threadbare blanket. The boy was 10, or close to it. Elias had stopped counting birthdays after the first winter. Theo wasn't his by blood, but the kid had latched on after Elias pulled him from a collapsed shelter in the ruins of Albany. Theo's parents had been taken by the fever, or so the boy whispered in his sleep. Nightmares that left him sweating and silent come morning. Elias caught glimpses of the child's resilience, the way he methodically checked their packs each dawn. But there was a hollowness in his eyes, a quiet that mirrored the empty roads. They passed a cluster of overturned cars, vines creeping over the hoods like fingers claiming territory. Elias slowed, scanning for movement. Nothing. Just the sway of branches in the breeze, shadows lengthening as the sun dipped lower. The air grew thicker here, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like blood long dried. Mara reached for the rifle propped between them, her fingers brushing the stock without gripping it. "Eyes open," she murmured. The truck crested a hill, revealing a small town below. Maplewood, the faded sign read. Roofs sagged under unchecked ivy, windows stared blank and shattered. Elias eased off the gas, letting the vehicle coast. "We need water. Whatever else we can find." Theo stirred at the words, rubbing his eyes. "Is it safe?" the boy asked, his voice small. "As safe as anywhere," Elias said, pulling into what was once a main street. Buildings loomed on either side, their facades peeling like old skin. A grocery store's doors hung ajar, contents long ransacked. They parked behind a rusted dumpster out of sight from the road. Elias killed the engine, and the silence rushed in, profound and watchful. Mara stepped out first, slinging the rifle over her shoulder. She moved with practiced caution, her boots crunching softly on broken glass. Elias followed, handing Theo a backpack. "Stay close, kid." Theo nodded, clutching the strap like a lifeline. They approached the store, the door creaking as Mara pushed it open. Inside, shelves lay toppled, cans scattered like forgotten bones. Dust motes danced in the slanting light, and the air hung stale, untouched. They split up wordlessly, Mara to the back aisles, Elias and Theo to the pharmacy counter. Elias rifled through drawers, finding a few bandages and expired painkillers. Theo pointed to a shelf. "Look, canned peaches." Elias pocketed them, a small victory. But as he straightened, a faint sound echoed from deeper in the store. A shuffle, like feet dragging on tile. Mara froze at the end of the aisle, her head tilting. Elias motioned for Theo to stay put, then crept forward. The sound came again, irregular, closer. He rounded a corner, heart steady but alert. There, in the dim light, a figure hunched over a spilled box of crackers. It was a man, or what was left of one, emaciated, clothes hanging in tatters. He didn't turn, just kept pawing at the crumbs, muttering incoherently. Elias raised his hand, signaling Mara to hold. The man wasn't infected. The outbreaks had burned out months ago, leaving only the starved and broken. But something felt off. The way he ignored their presence, his breaths ragged and wet. "Hey," Elias called softly. "We're not here for trouble." The man paused, then slowly lifted his head. His eyes were milky, unfocused, but they locked on Elias with an unnatural intensity. A low groan escaped his lips. Not pain, but something primal. Hungry. Mara stepped into view, rifle ready. "Back away," she whispered. Theo's voice cut through from behind. "Elias, what's that smell?" The air shifted then, a wave of putrid sweetness rolling from the man. He lurched forward, not fast, but deliberate, arms outstretched. Elias shoved him back, the body lighter than expected, like hollow bones. The man hit the shelf and crumpled, but didn't stay down. He rose again, whispering now, words that slithered into Elias's ears. "Join us." The quiet calls. Mara fired a warning shot into the ceiling, plaster raining down. The man didn't flinch, just advanced, his grin splitting wider, revealing teeth filed sharp. Elias grabbed Theo and backed away, heart pounding now. They burst out the door, Mara covering their retreat. The man followed to the threshold, stopping at the sunlight, his shadow stretching long across the pavement. They piled into the truck, Elias gunning the engine. As they sped out of town, Theo glanced back. "He's still watching," the boy said, voice trembling. The road wound into hills, the sun setting behind them, painting the sky in bruised purples. Elias drove in silence, the encounter replaying in his mind. It wasn't the violence that unnerved him. It was the whisper, echoing like an invitation. Mara cleaned her rifle methodically, her face unreadable, but her hands shook slightly, a tell from her days as a nurse, patching wounds in makeshift clinics before the collapse. Night fell gradually, stars piercing the sky like watchful eyes. They camped off the road in a clearing ringed by dense woods. Firelight flickered as they ate the peaches in silence. Theo fell asleep first, curled against Elias's side. Mara stared into the flames. "That wasn't just madness," she said finally. "He was waiting." Elias nodded, the unease settling deeper. The woods around them seemed to breathe, branches rustling without wind. In the distance, a howl rose, not animal, but human, twisted into something else. It faded, leaving only the crackle of the fire. As sleep tugged at him, Elias heard it again. The whisper, faint but clear, carried on the night air. "Join us." He sat up, scanning the darkness. Nothing moved. But then, from the edge of the trees, eyes glinted, multiple pairs unblinking, drawing closer. The firelight flickered, casting jagged shadows across the clearing as Elias gripped the hatchet at his side. The glinting eyes in the trees held steady, unyielding, their number impossible to count in the dark. Mara was already on her feet, rifle aimed, her breath shallow but controlled. Theo stirred, sensing the tension, his small hand clutching Elias's sleeve. "What's out there?" the boy whispered, voice barely audible over the fire's crackle. "Don't move," Elias said, eyes locked on the tree line. The air felt heavier now, thick with that same putrid sweetness from the store, curling into his lungs like a warning. The howl they'd heard earlier didn't return, but the silence that followed was worse. Alive, expectant, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Mara shifted her stance, her boots scuffing the dirt. "They're not coming closer," she murmured, but her tone carried no relief. She was right. The eyes stayed at the edge of the clearing, swaying slightly, like lanterns caught in a breeze. Elias counted at least 6 pairs, maybe more, their glow unnatural in the starlight. He tightened his grip on the hatchet, its worn handle grounding him against the creeping dread. "Pack up," he said quietly. "We're not staying." Theo moved quickly, stuffing their meager supplies into the backpack, his hands trembling but precise. Mara kept her rifle trained on the trees, her gaze darting between the eyes and the truck parked just beyond the fire's reach. Elias doused the flames with dirt, the sudden darkness swallowing the clearing. The eyes seemed to brighten, sharper now, cutting through the black. They moved as one, Elias leading Theo by the arm, Mara walking backward to cover them. The truck's door creaked as Elias yanked it open, ushering Theo inside. The boy scrambled into the back seat, pulling the blanket over his head like a shield. Mara slid into the passenger side, rifle still up, her jaw set. Elias turned the key, the engine sputtering once before roaring to life. The headlights flared, illuminating the trees, and for a moment, the figures were visible. They weren't like the man in the store, not entirely. These were silhouettes, tall and gaunt, their limbs unnaturally long, swaying in a rhythm that matched no wind. Their faces, if they had any, were obscured, but their eyes burned with that same milky glow. One stepped forward just into the light's edge, its head tilting as if studying them. It raised a hand, fingers splayed, and Elias swore he heard the whisper again. "Stay. The quiet knows you." He floored the gas, the truck lurching forward, tires spitting gravel. The figures didn't pursue, but their eyes followed, unblinking, until the trees swallowed them from view. The road stretched dark and empty, the headlights carving a tunnel through the night. Theo peeked out from under the blanket, his voice small. "Are they gone?" "For now," Mara said, her eyes still scanning the rearview mirror. She didn't lower the rifle, resting it across her lap instead. Elias caught the faint tremor in her hands again, a reminder of the clinic she'd worked in, stitching up survivors while screams echoed outside. She'd never spoken of it, but he'd seen the scars on her forearms, defensive wounds from something or someone. They drove for hours, the road winding deeper into the hills. The valley was still a day's journey, maybe two, and the fuel gauge dipped lower with each mile. Elias kept his focus on the road, but his mind replayed the figures swaying, their whispered words burrowing like splinters. He'd seen desperation before, looters, scavengers, even the infected in the early days, but this was different. It wasn't hunger or madness, it was purpose. Dawn broke slowly, gray light seeping over the horizon, revealing a landscape of rolling hills and skeletal trees. They passed a rusted water tower, its faded letters spelling out Haven, though the town below it was little more than crumbled foundations. Elias pulled over near a stream, its water sluggish but clear. They filled their canteens in silence, Theo keeping watch with a pocket knife clutched tight. The boy's eyes darted to the woods, searching for movement. Mara knelt by the stream, splashing water on her face. "You ever hear anything like that before?" she asked, not looking at Elias. "That whispering." He hesitated. There'd been rumors in the early days before the radios went silent. Stories of people vanishing into the woods, drawn by voices no one else could hear. He'd dismissed them as panic-driven folklore, but now the memory felt heavier. "No," he lied, not wanting to feed her fear. "Just people broken by all this, happens when the world ends." She nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe him. She stood, wiping her hands on her jeans, and froze. "Elias," she whispered, pointing upstream. There, half hidden by reeds, was a shoe, a child's sneaker, laces tangled in the mud. Elias approached, his boots sinking into the damp earth. It wasn't just a shoe. Nearby, a torn jacket lay crumpled, its fabric stained dark. No body, no blood, but the air carried that same sweet rot stench. Theo edged closer, his face pale. "Was someone here?" "Old," Elias said, though the mud around the shoe looked freshly disturbed. He glanced at Mara, who was already scanning the trees. The hills felt watchful, their slopes pressing in like a held breath. "We need to move." They returned to the truck, the morning light doing little to ease the tension. As Elias drove, the road narrowed, flanked by dense forest. The trees seemed to lean inward, branches scraping the truck's roof like fingers testing for weakness. Theo hummed softly to himself, a habit from quieter days, but even that felt fragile, as if the sound might draw attention. By midday, they reached a crossroads, a faded sign pointing to a place called Black Hollow. A dirt path veered off the highway, barely wide enough for the truck. Elias slowed, considering. The valley was straight ahead, but the fuel gauge hovered near empty. Black Hollow might have supplies, or it might be another trap, like Maplewood. Mara studied the sign, her fingers tapping the rifle. Could be a gas station. Or people. Her voice held no hope for the latter. Elias weighed the risk. The whispers lingered in his mind, their cadence almost familiar now, like a song half remembered. We'll check it, he decided. Quick in, quick out. The dirt path wound deeper into the forest, the canopy blotting out the sun. The truck's engine growled, struggling with the uneven terrain. After a mile, they saw it. A cluster of buildings, half swallowed by vines. Black Hollow wasn't a town anymore, just a graveyard of clapboard houses and a single gas station. Its pumps rusted but intact. Elias parked, scanning for movement. The air was still, the silence thicker than before. They stepped out, weapons ready, Theo sticking close. The gas station's windows were boarded, but the door hung ajar, swaying slightly. Mara pushed it open and the bell above jingled, a sharp wrong sound in the quiet. Inside, the shelves were bare, but a metal cabinet in the back caught Elias's eye. He pried it open, revealing 2 cans of gasoline. Jackpot, he muttered, but the word felt hollow. The air inside was wrong, heavy with that familiar stench. Theo tugged his sleeve, pointing to the floor. There, scratched into the wood, were words, "The quiet takes." Below them a crude symbol, a circle with jagged lines radiating outward, like a sun or an eye. Mara's breath caught. We're not alone here. Before Elias could respond, the bell jingled again. The door hadn't moved, but footsteps echoed outside, slow, deliberate, circling the station. And then from the walls themselves the whisper rose, louder now, a chorus of voices weaving together. Stay. It sees you. The footsteps outside the gas station grew closer, deliberate, crunching on the gravel like bones snapping underfoot. Elias's pulse thudded in his ears, but he forced his breathing to stay even, his hand steady on the hatchet. Mara crouched by the door, rifle aimed at the sliver of daylight seeping through the gap. Theo pressed against the wall, his pocketknife trembling in his small fist, eyes wide but silent. The air inside the station thickened, the sweet rot stench coiling tighter, as if the building itself were exhaling. The whispers continued, seeping from the walls, the floor, the air itself. Stay, it sees you. The voices overlapped, not quite human, their cadence slithering into Elias's thoughts like oil. He shook his head, trying to focus, but the words clung, tugging at memories he'd buried. His sister's voice calling his name from a burning house years ago before the world broke. Elias, Mara hissed, her voice low but urgent. We need to move, now. He nodded, glancing at the gasoline cans in his hand. 2 cans weren't worth dying for, but they couldn't make the valley without them. He gestured toward the back of the station, where a rusted exit sign hung crookedly above a door. That way, quiet. They moved as a unit. Theo between them, his steps careful but quick. The footsteps outside paused, and for a moment the whispers stopped too, leaving a silence so deep it felt like drowning. Elias reached the back door, easing it open. The hinges groaned, a sound that seemed to echo across the hollow. Beyond the door, a narrow alley stretched, flanked by sagging buildings and overgrown weeds. No figures, no eyes, just the forest looming at the alley's end, its trees knotted and dark. They slipped outside, the gravel underfoot betraying every step. Elias led, clutching the cans, his hatchet ready. Mara covered the rear, her rifle sweeping the shadows. Theo's breathing was shallow, almost inaudible, but Elias felt the boy's fear radiating like heat. The alley was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hid things that watched, waited, whispered. Halfway down, Mara grabbed Elias's arm, pointing to a wall. Another symbol was scratched there, identical to the one inside. A circle with jagged lines, its edges smeared with something dark, dried blood maybe, or worse. Below it, more words. It hears you. Elias's stomach twisted. He'd seen graffiti in the early days, desperate messages, warnings. But this felt different, like a command carved by something that wasn't human. Keep going, he whispered, but his voice sounded thin, swallowed by the hollow stillness. They reached the alley's end, where the truck waited beyond a chain-link fence. Elias set the cans down, fumbling with the gate's latch. It was rusted shut, the metal cold and unyielding. He glanced back, expecting to see those glowing eyes, but the alley remained empty. Too empty. Mara knelt, helping Theo climb the fence first. The boy scrambled over, landing softly on the other side. Elias followed, the cans awkward in his hands, scraping against the metal. Mara was last, her movements precise but hurried. As she dropped to the ground, a sound broke the silence. A low, guttural hum. Not from the alley, but from the forest beyond. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, but it carried the same weight as the whispers, vibrating in Elias's chest. They sprinted to the truck, Elias pouring the gasoline into the tank while Mara kept watch. Theo climbed into the back seat, his knife still out, eyes darting to the trees. The hum grew louder, joined by a rustling, like leaves stirred by something heavy moving through the underbrush. Elias capped the tank, his hands slick with sweat. "Get in," he said, voice tight. The truck roared to life and they peeled out, the dirt path spitting stones behind them. The hum faded as they reached the main road, but the whispers lingered in Elias's mind, their rhythm syncing with the engine's drone. He glanced at Mara, her face pale but set, her fingers still gripping the rifle. "What the hell was that?" she asked, not expecting an answer. "I don't know," Elias said, eyes on the road. He didn't mention the hum or how it felt like it was calling him specifically, tugging at something deep and forgotten. He'd lost people before, his sister, his neighbors, entire towns. But this was different. This wasn't loss. It was invitation. The road stretched on, the forest thinning as they climbed higher into the hills. The valley was closer now, its promise of safety a faint light in their minds. But the hollow had left its mark. Theo hadn't spoken since the station, his silence heavier than usual. Elias caught him staring at the backpack, where he'd tucked the child's sneaker from the stream, as if it were a relic. They stopped at dusk, pulling off into a rocky outcrop overlooking a ravine. The sky bled red, the sun sinking behind jagged peaks. Elias built a small fire, more for light than warmth, its glow a fragile barrier against the dark. Mara sat cross-legged, cleaning her rifle with mechanical precision. "We can't keep running into places like that," she said, her voice low. "That wasn't just people gone mad. You felt it." Elias nodded, poking the fire with a stick. He didn't want to admit how the whispers had stirred something in him, a pull he couldn't explain. "We'll stick to open roads from now on. No more towns." Theo looked up, his voice small but steady. "What if it follows us?" The question hung unanswered, the fire's crackle filling the silence. Elias wanted to reassure the boy, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he handed Theo a piece of dried fruit from their dwindling supplies. "Eat, then sleep. We've got a long day tomorrow." Night settled over the outcrop, the stars sharp and cold. Elias took first watch, his hatchet across his lap. Mara and Theo slept fitfully, their breaths uneven in the quiet. The ravine below seemed to swallow sound, its depths invisible even in the moonlight. Elias scanned the horizon, the hills rolling like waves frozen in time. He told himself they'd left the hollow behind, that the whispers were just echoes of fear. But then he heard it, a faint hum rising from the ravine. Not the wind, not an animal, but that same guttural pulse from the forest. He stood, hatchet in hand, peering into the dark. The hum grew, weaving into whispers, clearer now. "You're already here. It knows your name." Elias's breath caught, his grip tightening. He turned to wake Mara but froze. At the edge of the firelight, just beyond the outcrop, a figure stood. Tall, gaunt, its limbs too long, swaying like the trees in Black Hollow. Its eyes glowed faintly, fixed on Elias, and its mouth opened, revealing a void where teeth should have been. The hum pulsed louder, vibrating in his bones, and the figure took a single step forward, its shadow stretching toward the fire. Mara stirred, her eyes snapping open. "Elias," she whispered, but he couldn't answer. The figure raised a hand, pointing directly at him, and the whispers swelled into a scream that wasn't sound but feeling. Raw, consuming, inevitable. The figure's scream, that soundless, bone-deep wail, clawed into Elias's mind, rooting him to the spot. The firelight flickered, its glow shrinking as if the darkness itself were pressing closer. The figure at the edge of the outcrop stood motionless now, its hand still raised, pointing at Elias with a finger that seemed too long, too thin, bending in ways that defied bone. Its glowing eyes held him, not with malice but with a cold, patient certainty, as if it had always known he'd be here. Mara was on her feet, rifle aimed, her voice sharp enough to cut through the haze in Elias's head. "Elias, move!" She stepped in front of him, breaking his line of sight with the figure. The scream faded, leaving a ringing silence, but the whispers lingered, soft and insidious. "You're already here. It knows your name." Theo scrambled upright, clutching his knife, his small frame trembling but rooted beside the fire. "What is it?" he whispered, eyes darting between Elias and the figure. The boy's voice was a tether, pulling Elias back from whatever edge he'd been teetering on. "Get to the truck," Elias said, his voice rough like he'd swallowed gravel. He grabbed the gasoline cans and shoved Theo toward the vehicle, his hatchet still in hand. Mara kept her rifle trained on the figure, backing away slowly. The figure didn't move, didn't pursue, but its presence felt like a weight pressing against their chests, slowing their steps. They reached the truck, Elias yanking the driver's door open. Mara slid into the passenger seat, Theo diving into the back. The engine sputtered, then caught, its roar a defiance against the silence. Elias floored it, the tires kicking up dirt as they swung onto the road. The figure remained at the outcrop's edge, its silhouette framed against the dying firelight, watching as they fled into the night. The road twisted through the hills, the headlights slicing through a darkness that seemed thicker now, almost tangible. Elias gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, trying to shake the memory of the figure's eyes. They weren't human, not anymore, but they weren't the fevered madness of the infected either. They were something else, something that knew him, or thought it did. Mara broke the silence, her voice low but steady. "That wasn't like the others. It didn't want to kill us." She paused, her fingers tracing the rifle stock. "It wanted something else." Elias didn't answer. He couldn't. The whispers had felt personal, like they'd reached into his past and pulled out pieces he'd buried. His sister's screams, the fire he couldn't outrun, the guilt that followed him across empty highways. He glanced at Theo in the rearview mirror. The boy was staring out the window, his knife still in hand, the child's sneaker from the stream tucked into his backpack like a talisman. They drove until dawn, the sky lightening to a sickly gray. The hills gave way to a flat expanse, the road cutting through fields choked with tall grass. The valley was close now, its promise of safety a fragile hope, but the fuel gauge hovered near empty again, and Elias knew they couldn't outrun whatever was following them, not on fumes. He spotted a barn ahead, its red paint peeling but its structure intact. "We'll stop there," he said, pulling off the road. "Check for supplies, then push on." Mara nodded, but her eyes were wary, scanning the fields. "No towns, you said?" "It's just a barn," Elias replied, though the words felt hollow. The fields around them swayed, the grass moving in patterns that didn't match the wind. He parked behind the barn, out of sight from the road, and they stepped out into air that smelled of damp earth and something sharper, like rusted iron. The barn's door was ajar, creaking as Elias pushed it open. Inside, the air was cool and stale, the floor littered with straw and broken tools. A ladder led to a loft, and a stack of crates sat in the corner, some cracked open, revealing cans of food. Beans, corn, enough to last days. Elias's relief was tempered by the sight of another symbol carved into a beam, that same jagged circle, its lines deep and precise, as if etched with care. Mara saw it too, her grip tightening on the rifle. "This isn't a coincidence," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's like they're leaving us a trail." Theo tugged at Elias's sleeve, pointing to the loft. "There's something up there," he said, his voice small but certain. Elias followed his gaze. A faint scratching came from above, rhythmic, like nails on wood. He motioned for Mara and Theo to stay back, then climbed the ladder, hatchet ready. The loft was dim, lit only by slivers of light through cracked boards. The scratching stopped as Elias's boots hit the floor. He scanned the shadows, his heart steady but loud in his chest. Then he saw it. A figure crouched in the corner, not like the one at the outcrop, but smaller, human. A woman, her hair matted, her clothes torn. She clutched a piece of wood, carving into it with a shard of glass, her hands bloody but deliberate. "Hey," Elias said softly, lowering the hatchet. "We're not here to hurt you." She didn't look up, just kept carving. The symbol took shape under her hands, that same circle, its lines jagged and deep. Her lips moved, whispering words Elias couldn't catch, but the cadence was familiar, echoing the voices from the hollow. He took a step closer and her head snapped up, her eyes wide but empty, like windows to a house long abandoned. "You heard it," she said, her voice cracked but clear. "It knows you're coming." Elias froze, the air turning cold around him. "What knows?" She smiled, a slow, crooked thing, and pointed the glass shard at him. "The quiet, it's been waiting for you." Her words carried the same weight as the whispers, as if she were a conduit, not the source. Mara's voice called from below. "Elias, get down here, now!" He backed away, the woman's eyes following him, unblinking. As he descended the ladder, he heard her resume scratching, the sound chasing him. Mara stood by the crates, her face pale. She pointed to the floor, where another message was scratched into the wood. "It waits in the valley." Theo was trembling now, his knife forgotten in his hand. "We can't go there," he said, his voice breaking. "That's where we're headed, isn't it?" Elias didn't answer, his mind racing. The valley was their last hope, the only place left that might be safe. But the symbols, the whispers, the figures, they were hurting them, drawing them closer to something he couldn't name. He grabbed the crates, shoving cans into their packs. "We're leaving now!" They ran to the truck, the barn's shadow stretching long across the field. Elias started the engine, the fuel gauge barely registering. As they pulled onto the road, the woman's voice echoed from the loft, louder now, almost a chant. "It knows your name. It knows your name." The road to the valley loomed ahead, the fields giving way to steeper hills, the trees closing in. The whispers returned, not from the air but from inside Elias's head, clearer now, calling his name in a voice that wasn't his sister's but felt just as close. He glanced at Mara and Theo, their faces set with fear and resolve, and knew they heard it too. As the truck crested a rise, the valley came into view. A narrow basin cradled by mountains, its center shrouded in mist. And there, at the valley's edge, stood a dozen figures, their long limbs swaying, their eyes glowing through the haze, waiting. The truck idled at the crest of the hill, its engine a low growl against the suffocating silence of the valley below. The mist hung thick, curling like smoke over the basin, obscuring the shapes of the figures standing at its edge. Their glowing eyes pierced the haze, unblinking, fixed on the truck. Elias counted 12, maybe more, their long limbs swaying in that unnatural rhythm, like reeds caught in a current only they could feel. The whispers pulsed in his head, no longer distant but close, intimate, weaving his name into their cadence. "Elias, it's been waiting." Mara's breath hitched, her rifle resting across her lap, her fingers twitching but not yet gripping the trigger. "We can't go down there," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Not with them waiting." Theo pressed himself against the back seat, his small frame hunched, the child's sneaker still clutched in his backpack. "They know us," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They knew we were coming." Elias's hands tightened on the wheel, the leather creaking under his grip. The valley was supposed to be their sanctuary, clean water, defensible ground, a chance to stop running. But the figures below, the symbols, the whispers, they weren't random. They were a net, closing around them. He thought of the woman in the barn, her bloody hands carving that jagged circle, her empty eyes promising something worse than death. "We don't have enough fuel to turn back," he said finally. "It's this or nothing." Mara's jaw clenched, her scars catching the dim light. "Then we go around, find another way in." Elias scanned the terrain. The valley's sides were steep, flanked by dense forest and rocky cliffs. A narrow path veered to the right, skirting the basin's edge, barely visible through the trees. It was a risk. Narrow roads meant no room to maneuver, but staying here exposed was worse. He shifted gears, easing the truck onto the path. The figures below didn't move, but their eyes followed, tracking the truck's slow descent like predators watching prey limp away. The path was rough, roots and rocks jarring the suspension. Branches scraped the truck's sides, their tips snapping with sharp, deliberate cracks. The mist thickened as they descended, curling into the cab through the cracked windows, carrying that familiar sweet rot stench. Theo coughed, pulling his shirt over his nose. "It's like the store," he said, voice muffled. "Like the hollow." Mara nodded, her eyes scanning the trees. "It's not just them, it's this place, the air, the ground, it's wrong." Elias didn't respond. His focus split between the path and the whispers, which grew louder, more insistent, weaving through his thoughts. They weren't just calling his name now. They were pulling at memories, his sister's hand slipping from his as the fire roared, the promises he'd made to keep her safe, broken in the ash. He shook his head, trying to clear it, but the voices pressed harder, their tone almost gentle, coaxing. "Come closer. It's already yours." The path opened into a clearing, a small plateau overlooking the valley. An old ranger station stood at its center, its wooden walls weathered but intact, a radio tower leaning beside it, half collapsed. Elias stopped the truck, the fuel gauge now a red warning. "We check it," he said, cutting the engine. "Maybe there's a radio, supplies, something." Mara hesitated, her gaze flicking to the valley below. The figures were no longer visible, swallowed by the mist, but their absence felt like a trap. "Quick," she said. "In and out." They approached the station, Elias leading with his hatchet, Mara covering with the rifle, Theo between them. The door was unlocked, swinging inward with a low groan. Inside, the air was damp, heavy with mildew and something sharper, like blood left to dry. Papers littered the floor, maps, logs, scrawled notes. A desk held a radio, its dials rusted, wires spilling out like guts. Elias tried the power switch, but it was dead, the silence mocking their hope. Theo pointed to a corner, where a sleeping bag lay crumpled, surrounded by empty cans and a single photograph, creased and faded. Elias picked it up. It showed a family, 2 adults, a child, smiling in front of a lake. The child's face was scratched out, the lines deep, deliberate. On the back, in shaky handwriting, "They took her, don't listen." Mara's voice broke the stillness. "Elias, look." She pointed to the wall where the jagged circle symbol was carved, larger this time, its lines smeared with dark streaks. Below it, more words. "It sees you in the mist." The floor creaked behind them, not from their steps but from deeper in the station. Elias spun, hatchet raised, as a shadow moved in the hallway beyond. It wasn't one of the figures, not tall, not swaying, but human, or close to it. A man stumbled into view, his clothes tattered, his face gaunt and streaked with dirt. He carried a hunting knife, its blade chipped but sharp. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice raw, like he hadn't spoken in weeks. "We're not staying," Elias said, stepping in front of Theo. "Just looking for supplies." The man's eyes darted to the symbol on the wall, then back to Elias. "You've heard it, haven't you, the quiet. It knows you're here." His voice trembled, not with fear but with a strange reverence, like a preacher mid-sermon. He took a step closer, knife glinting in the dim light. "It's already chosen you." Mara raised her rifle. "Back off," she said, her tone cold but steady. The man stopped, his gaze shifting to her, then to Theo. He smiled, a broken thing, and whispered, "The boy hears it loudest." Theo flinched, his hand tightening on the sneaker in his backpack. Elias felt a chill, the man's words echoing the whispers in his head. "We're leaving," he said, backing toward the door, motioning for Mara and Theo to follow. The man didn't move, just watched, his smile widening as they retreated. Outside, the mist had thickened, swallowing the truck's outline. Elias hurried them forward, his boots sinking into the damp earth. But as they reached the vehicle, he froze. The tires were slashed, deep gashes leaking air, the rims kissing the ground. Mara cursed under her breath, her rifle sweeping the clearing. "They're here," she said, her voice barely audible. The whispers surged, louder now, a chorus that seemed to rise from the mist itself. "You can't leave, it's already yours." Elias scanned the trees, expecting those glowing eyes, but saw nothing, just the mist, coiling tighter, like a living thing. Theo tugged at his sleeve, pointing to the ground. Another symbol, freshly carved into the dirt, its lines still wet with moisture, as if the earth itself had bled to form it. The creak of the station's door echoed behind them. The man stood there, knife in hand, his smile gone. "It's not them you should fear," he said, his voice carrying over the whispers. "It's what's waiting in the valley." Before Elias could respond, the ground trembled. A low, deep rumble. Not an earthquake, but something alive, pulsing beneath their feet. The mist parted briefly, revealing the valley's heart. A dark, gaping hollow, its edges lined with more figures, their eyes glowing brighter, their limbs stretching toward the sky. And from the hollow's depths a single piercing note rose, a sound like a scream, a song, a summons, calling them closer. The rumble beneath their feet faded, but the piercing note from the valley's hollow lingered, vibrating in Elias's chest like a second heartbeat. The mist swirled thicker now, a living curtain that blurred the figures at the valley's edge, their glowing eyes flickering like stars in a storm. The truck sat useless, its slashed tires a death sentence on this narrow plateau. Elias clutched his hatchet, its weight a small anchor against the dread coiling in his gut. Mara stood beside him, rifle raised, her scars stark against her pale skin in the dim light. Theo pressed close, his small frame shaking, the child's sneaker still tucked in his backpack, a relic of a world that no longer existed. The man from the ranger station stepped closer, his hunting knife glinting as he moved into the mist. "You can't run," he said, his voice soft but heavy, like he was reciting a truth he'd learned the hard way. "The quiet's already inside you." His eyes flicked to Theo, then back to Elias, a faint smile curling his lips. "It's been waiting for you, all of you." "Stay back," Mara snapped, her rifle trained on his chest. Her hands were steady now, the tremor gone, replaced by the cold resolve Elias had seen in her when they'd faced scavengers in the early days. But this wasn't a scavenger. The man's gaze held no hunger, no desperation, just that same reverent certainty, as if he were a messenger for something vast and unseen. Elias scanned the clearing, the mist pressing in from all sides. The path back to the road was gone, swallowed by the haze. The only way forward was down, into the valley, toward the hollow and its waiting figures. The whispers surged again, no longer just in his head but in the air, weaving through the mist. "Elia, Mara, Theo, come home." The voices knew them, not just their names but their fears, their losses. Mara's patience she couldn't save, Theo's parents taken by the fever, Elias's sister burning in a house he couldn't reach. "We can't stay here," Elias said, his voice low, urgent. "We move now." He grabbed Theo's arm, pulling him toward the valley's edge. Mara hesitated, her eyes locked on the man, then followed, keeping her rifle trained behind them. The man didn't pursue, just stood there, his silhouette fading into the mist, his knife dangling at his side. The descent was steep, the ground slick with damp grass and loose stones. Elias led, his boots slipping as he navigated the slope, Theo's hand tight in his. Mara brought up the rear, her steps deliberate, her breathing sharp. The mist clung to them, cold and heavy, carrying that sweet rot stench that seemed to pulse with the whispers. The figures at the hollow's edge were closer now, their long limbs swaying, their eyes brighter, unblinking. Elias tried to focus on the path, but the note from the hollow grew louder, a siren's call that tugged at his resolve. At the valley's floor, the mist parted slightly, revealing the hollow, a yawning pit, its edges jagged, like a wound torn into the earth. The figures stood in a loose circle around it, not moving, not speaking, their presence a silent command. Elias stopped, his heart pounding. Theo whimpered, clutching the sneaker tighter. Mara's rifle wavered, her voice a whisper. "What are they?" "Not human," Elias said, though the words felt inadequate. They weren't infected, weren't scavengers. They were something older, something that had waited in the quiet long before the world broke. He thought of the symbols, the carvings, the whispers. They weren't warnings, they were invitations. The note from the hollow shifted, softening into a hum that vibrated in their bones. One of the figures stepped forward, its limbs bending at impossible angles, its face a featureless void except for those glowing eyes. It raised a hand, not threatening but beckoning, and the whispers swelled. "Step closer, it's yours." Elias felt the pull, not just in his mind but in his body, his feet itching to move toward the pit. Mara grabbed his arm, her grip bruising. "Don't," she said, her voice shaking but fierce. "It's not calling us to safety. It's calling us to end." Theo's voice broke through, small but clear. "It knows my mom," he said, tears streaking his face. "It's using her voice." Elias looked down, seeing the boy's anguish, the sneaker clutched like a lifeline. He remembered Theo's nightmares, the way he'd whispered about his parents in his sleep, and realized the whispers weren't just in their heads. They were tailored, personal, pulling at their deepest wounds. The figure took another step, its hand still outstretched. The others began to hum, their voices joining the hollow's note, a chorus that pressed against Elias's skull. He staggered, the hatchet slipping in his grip. Mara fired a shot into the air, the crack shattering the hum for a moment. The figures paused, their eyes flaring brighter, but they didn't advance. "Run," Mara said, shoving Theo toward a gap between the figures. Elias grabbed the boy, sprinting toward the trees at the valley's edge. The mist swirled, the whispers rising into a scream, not of anger but of loss, as if they were being torn from something vital. The figures didn't chase, but their eyes followed, burning through the haze. They crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at their clothes. The hum faded, but the whispers clung, softer now, pleading, "Don't leave. You're already home." Elias's legs burned, his lungs aching, but he kept moving. Theo's hand in his, Mara's footsteps steady behind them. The forest thinned, opening onto a rocky ridge overlooking a river, its water glinting faintly in the dawn light. They collapsed, gasping, the mist thinning behind them. The valley was out of sight, but its presence lingered, a weight in the air. Elias checked Theo, then Mara, their faces pale but alive. "We're not going back," he said, his voice raw. "We find another way." Mara nodded, her rifle still in hand, her eyes haunted. "It's not done with us," she said, glancing at Theo. The boy was silent, staring at the sneaker, his fingers tracing its laces. Elias stood, scanning the river below. It was a new path, untainted by symbols or whispers, but the quiet felt different now, watchful, waiting. He thought of the man in the station, the woman in the barn, the figures in the valley. They weren't chasing them. They didn't need to. The quiet was everywhere, patient, eternal. As they descended toward the river, the whispers returned, faint but clear, carried on the wind. "You'll come back. It knows your name." Elias tightened his grip on the hatchet, his eyes on the horizon. The world was broken, but they were still here, still fighting. For now, that was enough. But as they reached the riverbank, Theo stopped, his eyes wide, staring into the water. Reflected in its surface wasn't just the sky, but a single glowing eye, unblinking, watching from depths that shouldn't exist. And from the river a new whisper rose, soft and final. "It's already here." Ending the story ends not with escape, but with inevitability. Elias, Mara, and Theo survive, but the quiet, the entity, the presence, whatever it is, remains. It's not a monster to be fought or a threat to be outrun. It's a force woven into the world's new silence, patient and inescapable. They'll keep moving, searching for safety, but the whispers will follow, burrowing deeper, calling them back to the hollow. The horror lies in the uncertainty, not knowing if they're running from something outside or something already inside them, waiting to bloom. Thank you for listening. Hope you didn't get too scared. If you want to listen more stories, check out my channel. Please leave a like and subscribe. It means the whole world to me.